Let's look at these stories in a little bit more detail. Harrison Griffiths is Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, who joins me on the line. Good morning, Harrison.
Hi, Rosie. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with this front page of the Times then. What is going on? There's this investigation from the newspaper to find out what companies are doing when they're dumping sewage in our waterways.
Yeah, it's quite a concerning story that's been building up for a couple of years now, as there is a quite significant amount of raw sewage that's being dumped in our public waters, often by water companies. And what the Times have sort of called attention to today is that is continuing at quite a pace. 372,000 spills at 12,000 sites in 2021, and that it's making it rather unsafe for people to use public waterways recreationally. And they're calling for some quite stringent penalties for water companies who violate this. They want the government to get tough on sewage, basically. One thing that concerns me slightly in this story is that they've called for jail and criminal penalties for water chiefs who violate sewage regulations. To me, this is part of a concerning trend that's emerging. People seem to think that using jail as a goal for their political changes they'd like to see, whether it's the online safety bill or the financial services and markets bill. I'm a little bit concerned that might be quite disproportionate for people dumping sewage.
So what would an appropriate punishment be?
Well, I think you continue to fine water companies if they are dumping raw sewage into public waters, but I think this is a broader problem with the system that currently exists. A question that I've had for quite some time about this is, well, where are they supposed to put the sewage? The sewage exists, it's processed in a certain way, and it doesn't seem like the government has a particularly good answer for them when they themselves ask this question.
Yeah, there are some case study stories inside the papers if you get a copy of the Times today of people living by the rivers, how for them, whether it's farm pollution, sewage and litter has just ruined the waterways that they use. It's some pretty sad reading, actually, for people who, maybe it's rowing, swimming, whatever they're up to, just are concerned about the safety of the water that's running alongside their properties and homes. Front page of the Telegraph, we've just been talking about the migration bill, the illegal migration bill, and they're reporting that safe routes will be opened up for 20,000 migrants a year, because so often in this conversation people say, tell me what the legal safe channels are to get here. Is there actually a solution coming?
Well, it looks like there might possibly be. One of the big problems with the surge of small boat crossings is that it's extremely difficult and in most cases actually impossible to find a safe and legal route to come to the UK unless you are from Ukraine, Afghanistan or Hong Kong. And apparently in order to placate some of his backbenchers who are concerned about the lack of safe routes for people outside those countries, the government, Rishi Sunak and the government might be opening about 20,000 person cap for legal routes coming over. One concern I have from this is that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary seem to be saying we don't want to do this until we've got a grip on the existing small boat crossings. But I think that maybe defeats the object a little bit, in that I think if you can do both at the same time, if you can try and bring this under control and show people that the system is not being excessively taken advantage of, while also dealing with one of the root causes, which is this lack of safe and legal routes, then I think you've probably got a good all-round solution going forward. Yes. But it looks like this could be moving and could sort of give us an immigration, give us a settlement on immigration that can please both sides, that make sure that we uphold our international obligations, our moral obligation to refugees, while also ensuring that the system isn't excessively taken advantage of.
Yeah, we'll be finding out more about the sort of intricacies of the bill as it goes through the Commons in the next couple of days. In the Times, there's this idea, because we're going to hear more from the Prime Minister today about this crackdown on antisocial behaviour. The idea of there being a digital hotline to report vandalism and drug taking. Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, I always thought that was 999, really. It's a bit of a worry to me that the government's basically admitting that the police aren't taking some of these issues seriously enough, that they need a whole new hotline that doesn't exist around the infrastructure that already exists. If people are committing crimes and other people see that and want to alert the police, I believe they already can do. What concerns me about this is that it's a continuation of the trend that we saw throughout COVID and since, to turn the country into curtain twitchers and snitches. It's good at least to see the government wants to take better action on antisocial behaviour like graffiti, for example. I think making people give restitution for their crimes, basically, by cleaning up the mess they made, is a much better idea than just punishing them with custodial sentences or letting them off the hook completely. However, with NOS, as I think has been previously said, the government...
Laughing gas you're talking about.
Yes, laughing gas. The government's misuse of drugs panel did not recommend that this be banned. There are exceedingly few deaths that are linked to laughing gas every year. I think it's 62 since 2001. This is not heroin we're talking about. And when the government looks at its record on the war on drugs, I think any honest person would say that it's time to start rolling that back rather than clamping down again. Are we really going to have the police going around saying people, oi, oi, have you got a licence for that whipped cream canister? It's pretty ridiculous to me.
But, I mean, the other argument is, why have you got your whipped cream canister out, in the park and then littering?
I mean, littering is sort of a slightly different aspect to it, I think. I think people should absolutely, the police should absolutely be going around stopping people littering. But why have you got your whipped cream canister out? I mean, it should be a free country, right? It's a victimless crime to have a whipped cream canister on you, and even in public. I don't think the police should be going around inquiring further when it comes to that.
We've got more on laughing gas in about 15 minutes on the programme. Alongside that story in the Times are these screen stills of MPs who got caught in a sting. For anyone who isn't familiar, Harrison, just explain what happened. And now there are some awkward questions for the MPs who are involved.
Yeah, so a few MPs, high-profile MPs, including Kwasi Kwarteng, Matt Hancock and Graham Brady, I think, have been stung by this group led by donkeys. Basically, it seems promising access to senior politicians, I think in some cases in return for working with these fictitious groups, attending board meetings in foreign countries and whatnot. And I think Michael Gove put it very well yesterday when he said that these MPs they have to answer to their constituents about this. First and foremost, the people who elect them may very well have questions about it, but as I'm not sure if they're accused of actually violating any laws or standards.
Yeah, so what do you think the sting actually achieved?
To be quite honest, I'm not sure. If the fact that Kwasi Kwarteng is friends with Boris Johnson, or at least friendly enough with Boris Johnson to set up a meeting, I don't think really should surprise anyone, given that they served in government together for several years.
What it has revealed, I guess, is sort of some of those conversations that happen when MPs are not involved in the job of representing their constituents but doing external work, and how much they charge for that. So that maybe is embarrassing, but yes, very clear to stress that nothing.
And as Michael Gove said, if it's within the law, ultimately they have to answer to their constituents for it. And if their constituents render a verdict that says, I don't think you should be doing this, then that's fair enough. But so long as it's legal in the meantime, I'm not really sure what it's achieved.
Yeah, and if they represent you, then that's a question you can answer as well. Keir Starmer has done an interview in a podcast, the High Performance podcast, with Jake Humphrey, and clearly it's a podcast they talk about sports, and Starmer made a really interesting, I wonder what you make of it, comparison. He said his job is like managing the England football team.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's good that we see the more human side of politicians sometimes. When I'm watching Prime Minister's Questions, as I do tune into every week, I'll look at what Keir Starmer's doing. It's a very intimidating job, and I'll still sit there and say, oh, why are you asking him about this and not this? Why is this your viewpoint? Why aren't you highlighting this issue that I personally care more about? Just as when I'm watching England, I say, why aren't you playing Marcus Rashford more and Jordan Henderson a little bit less? It's a very high pressure job. It's a vital job to ensure accountability for the government of the day. It's probably the most high visibility opportunity to do that. He does have quite a job on his hands, and maybe even if we are critical, we should see the human side a little bit more and think, could we necessarily do a better job? I'm not sure I could.
Well, he says, I often say to people, being leader of the opposition is a bit like being the England manager, where everyone can do your job better than you. Everyone's got an opinion that you should be doing. I wouldn't have played him at left back, for example. Do Do you think that you're looking at the Labour Party and saying this is an opposition who are absolutely ready, fine-tuning policy, they're a government in waiting?
Well, I'm not sure really. That's going to be one that's up to the voters in 2024. At the moment, my biggest interest is whoever is in government to try and have it so that they are creating the most free and prosperous society, whoever that is. It's not a particular concern to me.
Finally, inside the pages of the Daily Telegraph, how are you on your recycling, Harrison?
Not great. I will admit that my mum and I over many years have had several disputes about what should go in which bin, and the idea that's in this story this morning that there could be up to 7 different bins for different type of recycling, it really does give me nightmares a little bit.
Yeah, local authorities are required to separately collect glass, paper, cardboard, metal, plastic, as well as general rubbish. So the paper is theorising that could mean that we have 7 bins in total to separate out all of that. I do have to say, if I put something in the bin that I think could be recycled and there isn't a recycling bin, I do now have a horrible feeling of guilt. I think we are all getting much better at this, but clearly we need to have enough of an easier job that it becomes not too difficult to recycle, or we just won't do it. 7 bins surely is not going to be workable.
Well, no, and no matter what side of the the recycling debate that you sit on, there are very fine margins involved as to whether recycling is actually worth it, and there are peaks and troughs of that depend on forces well outside anybody's control, like the value of Asian currencies against Western currencies, the price of a barrel of Brent crude oil. And with these very fine margins that exist, you really do have to ask yourself as to whether all the guilt and all the decision making that one has to make would be particularly worth the trade-off when it comes to putting things in the bin. I'm not sure more guilt and more decision making is what people need when it comes to recycling. I think we already have enough of a job.
Harrison, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure going through the papers with you. Harrison Griffiths, Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs.